and I stand boldly in who I am. But then when that comes and hits me, I help them to try to understand that all of us are not the same, and the people that they reflected upon probably did some very bad things, and I'm not taking that away from them. But I'm sorry that happened. And a lot of times that does help them to understand that I too am a Christian, and maybe your experience with me will maybe be a pleasant one and change your mind. And so being able to do that is a part of what we are able to do in order to avoid so much loss. So before we can change someone else, we must be able to first start with the own change within ourselves. And this idea of being weak is where we start. Okay, so real quick, I have 4 ways in which we become weak, and it's in the acronym of weak. So there's a W, there's an E, there's an A, and a K. We'll start with the W real quick. The first thing that we must do in order to bring about this change is the W, which is be willing. Okay? Are you willing to be changed? How many of you hate change? How many of you don't mind it so much? Like you just kind of go with the flow, more adaptive. I'm really rigid. I don't do well with sudden change. And so it's really hard for me. And there's a lot of us who just can't do change very well and aren't willing to change it. There's a lot of reasons why there's those of us who are not willing to change. Sometimes the initial change itself is not positive, like a health crisis or the end of a relationship or losing a job. Those type of changes are really challenging to deal with. There's the fear of the unknown, like if this change, how will I deal with what I've always been used to? Sometimes there's habits that we've become accustomed to, whether they're good or bad. There are habits, and we are going to continue to do them. And changing from those habits can be quite a challenge. Sometimes you don't truly believe in the core of that change. Like, I don't need to change. I'm fine the way I am. So on a core level, that's a belief there. And some people just don't make themselves available to that type of adaptive behavior. But there are ways in which we can change. One of the first steps in changing is first deciding that you are willing to actually change. Just being open to the idea that maybe a little bit of part of me might need to actually make a change. And then in coming to do that, then it starts with not judging yourself. It's like, I'm not going to judge myself. I'm going to be mindful to this idea that my views are not the only views, and this is something that might actually benefit everyone. And ask yourself, if being changed what would being changed by change look like for my life? So just get into a place of imagination that this might actually be something beneficial, and I would want to do this. And you can answer that question by remembering times when you really felt transformed in some way, and you're willing and witnessed the change in maybe a child or in a spouse or a sibling. You're like, well, it worked out for them. In the end, they lost their job. They were out for a long time, but in the end, it actually worked out. And we probably can all reflect upon times where we experienced dramatic change, but in the end, it actually worked out. So the first part of that is being willing. The next part with the E, someone already been in my computer and said what the E was. Do you remember a moment ago? They shouted it out when I said, yes, empathy. Empathy is the next part of that weakness. So if we're going to take on the challenge of making new disciples and spreading the gospel and sharing this amazing gift that we have to be willing. Then next we have to experience empathy. Empathy is the experience of understanding another person's condition from their perspective. You place yourself in their shoes and feel what they are feeling. While American culture might be socializing people into becoming more and more individualistic rather than empathetic, research has uncovered that being empathetic produces amazing things. Like, for instance, there's a neuron inside of us that if I stood up here and started yawning, many of you would also yawn. That's called a mirror neuron. And so we don't understand, please don't yawn during my sermon. It hurts my feelings. And so we have this mirror neuron that takes place, but it's actually this like biological thing that's happening in us that we actually can be empathetic. Empathy is a little different than compassion. Compassion is having a disposition of pity. It is showing mercy and having a heart that is tender and easily moved by distressing, suffering, affirmities, all these types of things. And so we think when we hear that, well, what exactly is pity? And it's generally defined as the uneasiness we feel at the unhappiness of another. So when others are unhappy, does it make you feel uneasy? Do you actually have pity when you see the suffering of another? And so when we deal with this, it is very common for us to look upon ourselves as wiser or better than others and having an attitude that makes one feel like they have the right to command or others or boss other people around. And if you ever think this, then you're probably deceiving yourself, because we know that our hearts and our ways sometimes are disliked by others, and we have to kind of check those things and help us to be more empathetic, more compassionate towards other feelings. Matter of fact, in Galatians it says to bear one another's burdens as a fulfillment of the law of Christ. And in here, we talk about bearing it is taking on the heavy load of another person's burden. When we go out, and many of you will go out and do some of the volunteering that's helping you with the disaster, you're going to actually bear the load of so many. When you visit people in the hospital, or you sit with a loved one who's been in loss, you're actually bearing the load of that person. And it's very, very important that we get into these levels of load bearing. So same happens with Christ. He knew that he was going to be here to suffer, and so he led in the empathy. We want a good example of empathy, then we look to Jesus Christ. Christ, in Christ's deity, did not have to do it that way. He chose to demonstrate that he wants to empathize with us by coming here in that manifestation. And so we have to be able to do this as well. So empathy is a very, very important part of this entire journey. So in being weak, first we are what? Willing. Next there is empathy, to empathize. Next you have the A. What do we think the A should be?
Action.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's not it, though.
It's not it.
That's just my thing.
It's your thing. Well, you come up here. I'm going to have a seat. What do we think the A could be? If we're really going to go out and making the disciples. I heard a few people say different words. Able. Come on, don't be afraid to.
Able.
Able, that'd be good too.
Attitude.
Oh man, that's a good one. Acceptance, that's really good. If we want to be able to do, we have to have the right attitude, and then there's this whole notion of being able to do it. That's really good. Ability is not always something all of us have, and being able to accept others is really, really important. I think when you experience empathy, you do get more into being a little more accepting. But still none of you have gotten the A that I was looking for. It is actually affirming. Affirming. Part of being weak really jumps into this idea of affirmation. And so in its best sense, affirmation means supporting the values of something or someone. It is both a yes in attitude, but then also in deed. So followers of Christ, disciples of Christ, as followers of Christ and disciples of Christ, we must affirm because God affirms. God is the first person that does all the affirmation. When we think back on God affirming us, does God not do so by making us at all? Just our existence on earth is a part of affirmation. Does God not find some way to tell you how amazing and beautiful and valuable you are on a regular basis? And so there are tons of ways in which God leads out in affirmation. And so we must look to find ways to do the same thing. Just be willing to affirm others. And as you recognize all these different opportunities, there's two ways to really do affirmation. The first thing is to notice, and the next thing is to verbalize. All the time you may notice someone, like, oh, I like her shoes. Well, what would it look like to go up to that person and say, your shoes are really cute? You know, what would it be like to not only notice someone, but just actually say, I'm noticing, acknowledging your humanness today.